Okay, we're looking at the game Sword of Rome, designed by Wray Ferrell and produced by GMT in 2004. And it was later done as a second edition in 2010, and that's the edition we'll be looking at today. Now the subject is the conquest of Italy, 386 to 272 BC. And the 5 players are the Romans, the Greeks, the Etruscans and Samnites together, the Gauls, and Carthage. Each player gets its own distinct deck of cards, and you get these handy 4 setup cards for each power. Each power also has 2 Desperate Times cards, which is always a permanent part of your hand. So it is a CDG game, and I'll go over some of the components and some of the rules and give you an idea what this game is like. Now the board is absolutely fantastic. It's typical Mark Simonich graphics. Very well done indeed. And you can see Sicily, and we've got most of Italy, and Corsica, Sardinia, and the territory of the Gauls at the top. Most of your critical game functions are on the board itself, the tracks, some of your key combat results tables, things like that. You also get with the game these player aid cards. You get 4 of them, double-sided, which is very handy. This way you're not diving for rules all the time. Each player has his own distinct card. And we'll take a closer look at the counters. They're the typical Roger McGowan, beautiful art on these counters. There are some of the counters. As I said, it's typical Roger McGowan art, just beautiful. They're very simple, but they're very effective. There you've got the Greeks, Romans, Etruscans, Carthage, and the Gauls. And you also get the Transalpine Gauls too. And the counters come in various denominations, mainly 2, 5, and 10. And they're double-sided. So your 2 flips to a 1. And I think your 5, flips to a 3. So very well done counters indeed. And of course your auxiliary counters like control markers have symbols appropriate to the side. And you've got your alliance chart on there. You can see who's allied to who by moving these markers around. And let's just take a look at some of the tables which are on the map. Your combat losses table. This table, by the way, is quite different than any other game I've seen, and we'll get to that later. Got your naval combat table, your siege subjugation table. There'll be lots of sieges in this game. Place for the Africa Spain garrison and your displaced leaders. Of course, your map key. Your attrition table, and a table for resolving ties when you have them. Table for combat modifiers, and a very detailed sequence of play, and your various track markers. Carthaginian unrest, your victory point track, turn track, round track, and for the Gauls, the plunder track. We'll take a little bit closer look at the game. These spaces are color-coded. Green are the Samnites, light blue is the Greeks, red is the Romans, yellow is the Etruscans, dark blue are the Gauls. Now this card-driven game, by the way, for Ancients is almost my favorite game for CDGs. I like Avalon Hill's Hannibal quite a lot, but I think I even prefer this one. This is a really good game, and it really shines as a multiplayer game. It can be played 2 players, but when you do play 2 players, each player will be actually taking another side too. You'll be playing one of the other powers as kind of an adjunct to your forces. This is a very fine game indeed. Well, what makes this game so special? Well, for one, the rulebook is very well written. I didn't have any problem with it at all. And it's illustrated too. Typical GMT layout. And I just didn't have any trouble learning the game. It's not that complicated a game, by the way. It's just a great game, a good strategy game. The playbook is very well done too. It's got setups for 5-player, 4-player, short game, 3-player, 2-player. Lots of illustrations, and there's an extended example of play, which I always find is handy to cement or drive home the rules that you've already read. Now, as I mentioned, each power has its own deck. Now, we'll look at some Roman cards, for example. Ferrell settled. Neutral power activates. So when you are playing Rome, let's say in a 2-player game, you might activate, let's say, I don't know, well, what are the Etruscans or the Samnites, we'll say, and you get to move those counters too. So the cards are not profusely illustrated. There isn't a lot of illustrations on them, but they're perfectly functional. And each power, as I said, has its own distinct deck. And the Desperate Times cards are always in your hand. Use those when you're really in trouble or you really need to move. Now, I've sorted the counters into their denominations. I put the 1s and 2 counters together, the 3 to 5 and 10 counters together. And of course, you get a host of leaders. I didn't really look at those. You get your historical leaders. There's Valerius, and there's Ignatius, and Alexander, Maximus, Agathocles. So you've got leadership in the game, and there's your control markers. You also get city counters, and depending on the figure on the counter, it depends, that will vary as to how hard it is to take in a siege. For example, a 1 city is going to be easier to take, let's say, than a 3 city. So you can, there will be lots of sieges in this game. Now, it's a typical conquer game. You'll be wanting to occupy your enemy's areas while at the same time preserving your own. So that's the essence of the game. Capturing enemy spaces and preserving your own territory. Not an easy thing to do sometimes in a 4-player game, especially for Rome, who is surrounded by her enemies. Each of the powers has certain strengths and weaknesses. For example, Rome just has her plain military strength. She's very resilient, gets lots of strength points, and is very tough to defeat in battle. The Etruscans, for example, have a very weak army, but they have an ability that no one else has. They have the ability to bribe the enemy away. For example, let's say the Gauls here were attacking Faesulae. Well, if the Etruscans have enough gold in their coffers, they can actually buy off the enemy and cause them to go back home. Like I said, they don't have a big army. They have to rely on their wealth, power, and diplomacy. So each of the powers just has different abilities. And that's one thing I like about it. It's asymmetrical. Each player does not play the same way as the other player. Now, the Gauls are completely different, because the Gauls are not interested in occupying permanently territory. They're mainly raiders, and they get victory points by raiding enemy spaces, like raiding the Etruscan lands, or maybe getting down here to the Samnite lands. And when they successfully raid, they put these Gallic plunder markers on the plunder track, and depending on how many of these they have, they score victory points. And there's your victory point marker. When you play the basic game there, the victory point markers all start at 6. So that's kind of, in essence, what the game is all about. Now, that description could fit a lot of different games. A lot of games are just divide and conquer, and that's what this one is. But somehow, this one just works really well. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the simplicity of the map, the cards, the counters. It just seemed to all come together in this game. Now, the combat results table is like no other I've ever seen. It's dare I call it weird? It's neat. I really like it. You roll a number of dice based on various factors, the size of your army, your leader, that kind of thing. And you get these weird results. You get the winner and then the loser. You roll on 2 different tables. And the results are you might lose a combat factor. You might lose 2 combat factors. It's just a very weird table. You can see it's not that bloody. There's a lot of no results, but somehow it works. Naval battles are rather simple too. 1-2 success, 3-4 return, 5-6 attrition. So the game is simple. I got to give it that. It is a simple game, but in its strategy, I mean, this thing is just all over the place. It's wild, especially as a 4-player game. Unfortunately, I don't get to play it much as a 4 or 5-player game. We can never seem to get a bunch of guys together at the same time. So I have played it very few times, but each time I've played it, I've enjoyed it very much. Now, one could do a much more detailed video in this game. It is a real gem. And I think if you catch Enrico Vigliano's videos, he'll show you a playthrough. That's not the objective of my video here. It's just to give you an introduction to the game. For those of you who are hesitating about purchasing it, it's quite a good buy. You know what? I think it's out of print now, to tell you the truth. I think it is, which is a shame. When they did the second edition, they did a very sturdy box with it too, because you're going to be hard pressed to get all these components in there. The game is mounted too, which is a nice bonus. So I don't know. That's all I can say about Sword of Rome. One of my favorite card-driven games following the Ancients period. And that's it. Thank you for watching.